Welcome to part 2. If you landed here without watching part 1, I'd really encourage you to go back and watch that first. I cover several critical concepts that are necessary to understand everything from here on. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy. I'll get straight back into it. In this part, I'll cover the 4 main rubber families and how they fit into the performance curve framework, the effect of sponge thickness on performance, and finally, a concrete way to estimate the performance curve of any rubber from its published manufacturer specs. Now, let's talk about thickness and how it affects the performance and feel of a rubber, and ultimately, how it can influence your game. Before we get into the details, let's look at the main reason you might want a thinner version of a rubber. The main gain is stability and control. The main currency you're paying for it is spin and speed potential. That's the general idea, but as usual in this sport, it's not quite that simple. Let's look at it closer. As the sponge thickness changes, a couple of things happen that I think we can all agree on. First, with thicker sponges, the ball's contact point is further away from the blade. At low speeds, this means the racket's performance becomes rubber-dominated. Only the top sheet and sponge really shape what happens to the ball. With thinner sponges, the ball contact point is now closer to the blade, and the blade's character comes through on every incoming ball, even slow ones. A good example. A soft, low elasticity sponge on a stiff outer carbon blade will, on a soft touch, completely dominate the feel of the racket and return a strongly depowered ball. As the shot speed increases and the sponge compresses to its limit, the depowering effect gets overridden by the stiffness of the carbon blade, which starts returning a lot of energy back into the ball and helping generate speed. This is exactly the kind of setup choppers favor: depowering on close-in defense against smashes, and a bit of natural pop when defending from distance, so they can get the ball back with minimal effort. The second point, and this is the bigger one, changing sponge thickness reshapes the entire performance curve of a rubber. As you go thinner, the whole performance curve shrinks and shifts to the left. The rubber bottoms out faster because it hits full compression earlier. The active window gets smaller because there's less sponge depth to compress elastically. In other words, the range in which the rubber performs well shrinks, and the transition between the rubber's 3 performance stages can get harsher or, in some cases, disappear entirely. This reshaping is exactly why different rubber types respond so differently to a change in thickness. It's common to find soft, beginner or defensive rubber in a range of thicknesses, but extremely rare to see thinner version of hard, powerful top-tier rubbers. After looking at hundreds of rubbers, the sweet threshold seems to sit around 1.7 millimeters. Below that, you're in defensive or disruptive territory, where changing thickness lets you fine-tune your setup's overall speed without sacrificing control. Above it, you're in offensive elastic territory, where the few thicknesses option on offer don't disrupt the rubber's offensive character. They just let you dial in its responsiveness and speed ceiling. That makes perfect sense within this framework. For softer rubbers, a thinner sponge can actually work well. You gain control and stability, sacrifice a little top-end power, and lose almost nothing in the short game. For harder sponges, built to perform at the high speed end of the curve, thinner than 1.8, 1.9 millimeters versions are rarely made, and now you understand why. The active part of the compression profile, the part that makes a hard sponge worth using, happens late in the compression. Cut the sponge thinner, and you cut that part off before you ever get there. You'd have all the drawbacks of a hard rubber and none of the benefits. The complex interplay of top sheet grip, sponge hardness, and elasticity ultimately determines exactly how thickness affects each rubber archetype, but the general principles apply across the board. Now let's see what shape the performance curve and activation window take in the four major rubber families and what that means in practice for feel and performance. There are four major archetypes: classic rubbers, high-tension rubbers, by many known with the moniker of tensor, although this is in fact a patented name, Chinese-styled tacky rubbers, and hybrid rubbers. Each has a different activation window and a different performance curve and ideal playing scenarios. Keep in mind that while the four families are genuinely distinct in their design philosophy, they are all ultimately trying to solve the same problem, and because each family spans a wide range of sponge hardness and elasticity combinations, the performance overlap between them today is significant. A soft, high elastic tensor and a well-designed hybrid can produce remarkably similar results on the table, even though they arrive at that result through different mechanisms. What follows is a framework, not a rigid classification. Use it to understand the logic behind each family, not to draw hard lines between them. Let's carefully look at each of them in detail. Classic rubbers. If a rubber isn't specifically marked as a tensor and the manufacturer doesn't mention any special sponge technology, it's almost certainly a classic. Examples include the Asaka Mark V and the Butterfly's rubber, rubbers that have been around for decades and are still used by millions of players worldwide. Classic rubbers don't offer the enhanced elasticity of a modern tensor and don't provide automatic speed or the catapult effect of a pre-tensioned topsheet. What they offer instead is linearity and predictability across a very wide range of impact speeds. The dampening effect of classic rubbers is higher than that of rubbers with more elastic sponges, meaning more energy is absorbed than returned. But this translates into wider activation windows, more consistent output throughout, and greater stability and control, often on a wider range of speeds. They are not the most exciting rubbers, they are some of the most honest. A sponge cannot perform exceptionally well at all speed levels simultaneously, so classic rubbers make a deliberate trade. Rather than excelling at one end of the spectrum, they perform reliably across a wide range and present lower activation requirements while maintaining good performance through a wide set of speeds. Classic rubbers sit at the lower end of the elasticity scale, which means they favor direct ball contact and flat hitting over spin-heavy topspin play. They won't generate spin automatically, that would require technique with this particular type of rubber. That's why you can find these rubbers mainly made by manufacturers to be used by beginners, where they provide a solid base to develop good technique and stroke control. They can be considered jack of all trades, master of none, but it's a quality that can be desirable for certain game styles based on control and flat aggression. High elasticity rubbers. To this category belong almost all rubbers produced today that incorporate sponges with a higher level of elasticity, maintaining a higher return on the energy input of the ball compared to more traditionally composed sponge materials. This result is achieved via a twofold mechanism. First, a highly elastic sponge that snaps back aggressively within its activation window. Second, a pre-tensioned top sheet. Pre-tensioning works as it sounds. Imagine a rubber band held in a state of slight stretch rather than resting loose. A tensor top sheet is manufactured under tension and bonded to the sponge in that state. When the ball impacts the surface, the top sheet is already loaded with potential energy. It releases more readily and more powerfully than a classic rubber under the same impact force. When this technology is coupled with softer sponges and beginner-friendly rubbers, it creates easy acceleration, easy topspin generation, and a sense of effortless speed that transformed modern table tennis, particularly for the amateur level. Tensor rubbers made advanced play and spin generation more accessible to beginner intermediate players and drove an enormous shift in playing styles across the world. But they introduced a genuine trade-off: sensitivity. The same pre-tension that generates speed automatically also makes the rubber more reactive to everything, including the shots you want to keep short and controlled. Touch play, short game, serve-receive all become slightly more demanding on tensor rubbers. In particular, when coupled with a harder sponge and rubber designed for aggressive and powerful players, the reactivity of the highly elastic top sheet and sponge at low speed is genuinely difficult to handle for a beginner, because the surface is extremely sensitive to incoming spin, and the sponge is inherently unstable on soft shots when technique is not on point. Tacky Chinese rubbers. Completely different philosophy. Where tensors give you energy, tacky Chinese rubbers ask you to bring it. Chinese rubbers couple relatively harder, less elastic sponges with an extremely tacky topsheet surface, creating a performance curve characterized by high spin potential, an activation window centered around high power levels, and very low energy return on softer shots. At low and medium impact speeds, the tackiness acts as a brake, which is compounded by the energy absorption of the sponge. A flat drive on a tacky rubber loses pace to the surface adhesion and sponge low reactivity. And even at moderate force, these rubbers can feel very slow, almost uncooperative. This changes though on spin-heavy shots. On serves and undercutting balls, the surface tack allows for imparting exceptional spin. The ball sticks to the surface long enough for the rubber to drag across it and impart exceptional rotation. And at high power levels, in fast topspin exchanges, the tackiness helps increase adherence to the surface as the sponge finally gives in to a powerful shot and envelops the ball, generating spin levels that some say are very difficult to achieve with friction-based rubbers. The hard, relatively inelastic sponge underneath provides the stability and directedness that complements this explosive grip. Players who have used these rubbers know that this is a setup with an incredibly high ceiling for spin and speed, and that both require and reward excellent technique. The result is a rubber with a pronounced dual character, one that feels almost dead to a player without the technique to activate it, and absolutely lethal in the hands of someone who can wield it. And finally, hybrid rubbers. Probably the most interesting category in modern table tennis and the fastest growing. Hybrids attempt to combine the grip and stability of Chinese tacky rubbers with the elasticity and easier activation of European tensor. The goal is to stretch the activation window in both directions, more accessible at low speeds than a pure Chinese rubber, more controllable at high speeds than a pure tensor. This is achieved by pairing a tacky or semi-tacky topsheet with a highly elastic sponge. At low speeds, the elastic sponge provides a boost that partially compensates for the dampening effect of the tackiness, making the rubber feel more alive on gentle shots than a traditional Chinese rubber. At high speeds, the tackiness provides the spin, grip and stability that pure tensor rubbers sometimes lack. The interaction creates a rubber that at its best offers the touch of a Chinese rubber with the accessibility of a tensor. At its worst, it inherits the compromises of both. In this simple test, you can see the hybrid behaving exactly as you'd expect, sitting neatly between a classic and a tensor. Its initial bounce is higher than a classic but lower than a tensor, and as the ball loses energy, the braking effect of the tackiness becomes increasingly pronounced. Now watch what happens when we remove the tackiness entirely with dusting of flour. The hybrid immediately behaves like a pure tensor, because with the top sheet grip neutralized, only the sponge elasticity remains. One practical note worth adding: both Chinese tacky and hybrid rubbers depend heavily on the condition of the top sheet surface. Performance is tightly tied to tackiness, which diminishes over time and with exposure to dust and sweat. These rubbers require more maintenance than classic or high elastic rubbers. Cleaning and protecting the surface after each session is not optional if you want consistent performance. But frameworks only become useful when you apply them, so let's do exactly that and look at some rubbers you've probably heard of through the lens of everything we've just covered. First example, Butterfly Techniques 09C and DHS Hurricane. Two rubbers that look similar on paper and are both used by world-class players. Both hard, both tacky, both capable of producing elite-level spin. On the surface, they seem like variations on the same theme, but they behave completely differently. Hurricane 3 is a classic Chinese archetype. Hard, relatively inelastic, narrow activation window centered at high impact speeds. At low speeds, it feels controlled, even slow. The player generates most of the acceleration themselves. There is no automatic catapult. In the hands of an intermediate player, it can feel almost dead. In the hands of Malong, it is devastating. Techniques 09C is still hard and still tacky, although not remotely as tacky as the Hurricane, but the sponge is far more elastic. Butterfly engineered it to combine the grip and stability of Chinese rubber with the automatic power return of an European tensor. The activation window begins at a lower threshold. More speed is generated automatically. The rubber rewards a wider range of techniques and impact forces. Same broad category, completely different activation behavior. The rubbers are often discussed as comparable option for the same player. They are not. They require a completely different technical approach, and now you know why. I love this example because Andro has given us the data to prove the framework directly. Andro Hexer Grip SFX and Andro Bibe SFX. Both rubbers rated at 40 degrees, same hardness again, same manufacturer, same scale, but Andro publishes speed ranges rather than single values, and those ranges are different. Hexer Grips SFX has a wider, mid-centered range, consistent output across a variety of shots, lively but not overly reactive. Bibe SFX, narrower, lower centered range, lively at low speeds for easy spin generation, but bottoms out quickly on harder shots. I bet you can guess what kind of players these two rubbers are designed for. Same hardness, different elasticity, different activation windows, different players. This is exactly what Andro was communicating, and now you understand it too. And now for the promised bonus section. Before I walk you through this, I wanted to mention that a lot of this work is already done for you in PongGenius. Every rubber in the database is rated on a single unified scale, so when you're comparing a butterfly with a DHS, with a Yazaka, you're finally comparing like for like. No more converting numbers, no more guessing whether a 9 from one brand means the same as a 9 from another. That said, understanding how to read raw numbers yourself is still valuable, so here's the framework applied to a standard spec sheet. With the insight from the framework, we should be able to estimate the activation window and performance curve of any rubber given its values of hardness, spin, and speed. Hardness tells you where the activation window is centered. A harder rubber has its window shifted toward higher impact speeds. It needs more force to wake up. A softer rubber has its window shifted toward lower speeds. It activates earlier and is accessible to a wider range of players. The ratio between speed and spin tells you about elasticity. A rubber that scores higher on speed than spin tends to be less elastic. It has a wider, more forgiving activation window but generates spin less automatically, such as Butterfly Rosina. A rubber that scores higher on spin than speeds tends to be more elastic. It grips the ball more readily and generates spin more easily, but with a narrower, more sensitive window, such as Tenergy25. It's not a perfect science, but it is a far more useful starting point than a single number with no context. And a quick rule of thumb by family. Tensor means you're accepting sensitivity at low speeds. Chinese tacky means you're bringing the energy yourself. Hybrid means a wider window with the compromises of both. Rubber behavior is genuinely complex, and subjective experience always plays a role, but this framework will get you further than 3 hours of contradictory forum posts. So that's the framework. It all starts with understanding the interplay of sponge hardness and elasticity and how they interact with different topsheet types. From here, how these elements shape each rubber's performance curve and its specific activation window. And finally, how to use that knowledge to understand the major rubber archetypes and how each one solves the speed, spin, and control balancing act for different players and playing styles. Understanding all this will not magically help you choose the perfect rubber overnight. Subjective feel is real, and no framework eliminates the need to actually hit with a rubber before committing to it. But it will do something much more valuable. It will stop you feeling lost. You'll start recognizing patterns in spec sheets. You'll understand why certain rubbers suit certain players. You'll stop being at the mercy of random online opinions from people whose technique, level, and playing style you know nothing about. And the next time you find yourself 3 hours deep in a forum reading completely contradictory reviews of the same rubber, remember that most of those people are probably talking about the same rubber at different speeds. They are not wrong, they are simply playing at different points in the rubber's performance curve. That feeling of actually understanding what you're looking at is what PongGenius is built around. If you want to go deeper, you can explore and search for upgrades for blades, rubbers, and complete setups, and much more at ponggenius.com. Link in the description. And if you found this useful, like and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find the video. Next up, we'll look at how blade and rubber interact as a complete system, because once you understand both components separately, the question of how they combine is where things get really interesting. See you in the next one.